soloists everywhere. There's going to be some changing up going on.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this festival concert of the Peoria Bach Festival. For those of you who are new to the Peoria Bach Festival, it was founded in 2003. John Jost and I, along with the Worship and Fine Arts Board of Trinity Lutheran Church just down the street, put it together, and we kept it going there for a great many years. A few years ago, they decided they would rather not host it anymore, so we want to thank Westminster for taking us in, and for their office staff, and for Polly Brecht, who not only plays organ but harpsichord. This is a very special harpsichord because it can be used at two different pitch levels. Back in the early 1900s, well, actually, before that, everywhere you went, everything was tuned at a different pitch level. Well, somebody decided way back when, you know, it'd be better if everybody just tuned at the same pitch level. So early in the, I think it was the 1900s, somebody decided, well, we should just make A equals 440. So that means the A above the middle C should vibrate at 440 times a second. And so then for the longest time, that was what was done. Now, with period instruments and stuff, people are performing at different pitch levels. They realize that things weren't standardized way back in the Baroque period. And so this harpsichord can be played at A equals 440, but then if you switch a little lever, then it plays at A equals 415, which is, I believe, about a half step lower. And so with that, we were able to do some now period instrument concerts, which we did on Tuesday evening. And now, but for this concert, then Polly's able to switch it back to A equals 440 because most of the modern instruments that we use are pitched in A equals 440. So we have a wonderful concert for you this evening. Our main conductor is going to be Andy Brune. Is Andy in the audience? Yeah, okay, there he is right there. So I want to thank Andy. He put a tremendous amount of work into this. So Andy studied at Wheaton and was a trumpeter, but then he somehow got the choral bug, and maybe sometime we'll have him tell you how all that happened. He ended up getting a doctorate in choral music over here at Illinois, and now is the director of choral activities at Illinois State University. So we have a lot of ISU musicians that are with us, along with Bradley musicians, and so it's just a wonderful collaboration. So now you have a program here. I just want to explain a couple of things in the program. Of course, you have the list of works that we're going to do along with the first half is instrumental, and then the second half is choral. So with the choral, we provide the text and the translation, of course. On the left side is the German, and on the right side is the English translation. And then you have some program notes. These kind of explain the different pieces. The first paragraph kind of explains the theme of this year. Every year we try and have a theme that runs through. So I'll just read this quickly with you. With this year's Peoria Bach Festival, we are inviting listeners into the wider musical world of the Bach family and the circle of musicians who shared and shaped their art. Our period instrument program on Tuesday evening highlighted the music of several of Johann Sebastian's contemporaries, composers who inspired, challenged, and occasionally competed with him. Tonight's program turns inward to the Bach lineage itself. It includes instrumental works by two of Sebastian's sons and a unique and powerful motet by his great-great-uncle Johann Bach, before closing with some of the master's own music. So that's kind of the theme that's running through our whole program this evening. Now the first piece is the orchestral suite in G minor. At first, scholars thought that this was another piece by Johann Sebastian Bach. So when they put his collected works together in the mid-1800s and the late 1800s, they included it as the fifth orchestral suite. Well, now scholars have decided that it's probably not by Bach, but might be by his son Wilhelm Friedemann. And so you can read about that in there. So then, for the second piece on the program, that's one by another one of Bach's sons, Johann Christian Bach. Now, Johann Christian Bach became very famous. He spent a lot of his career actually in England and is known as the London Bach. And so he wrote some of these marvelous pieces for, in this case, it's a concerto, which includes, is for 4 solo instruments, a quartet, solo quartet. And so it's just an incredible, incredible piece. And so then after the intermission, we begin with then the sacred choral music. And there, the first is the motet Unser Leben ist ein Schatten. Now, we have the choir with us. I asked them to join us again this year for the lecture, and in a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more deeply about that one. After that motet, then we get into Cantata 78, which is composed for the 14th Sunday after Trinity. And that one is really a lot of The first opening chorus is very, very intense, a lot of chromaticisms, descending chromatic scales, ascending chromatic scales. So a chromatic scale. The choir knows this very well because, in fact, in one of the warm-ups, Andy was having them sing. In fact, choir, let's just do an ascending, just on a hum. Ready? And just to get that, it's a very, not very often we sing on these chromaticisms, and so just to get us really, the voices used to that. And going down. And then one rehearsal, he had them do this. Going opposite ways. So I'll have to remember that one. That's a good warm-up. Anyway, and so then the second movement on that is an aria. It's actually a duet. And so what's really cool, it's one of the greatest and most joyful duets. And the cool thing about this here is that the soloists, the alto soloist is Elizabeth Thompson, Lily Thompson, who teaches also at ISU, and the soprano is her student, Esther Lee, so that's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, so that's a little bit about that motet. And then we decided to add something to the program. So now for that, it's a little bit out of the box. Get it? Out of the box? Out of the box. I have to thank Lydia Brune for that. Andy's wife is playing French horn. And so when I introduced this idea to the choir and orchestra, I said, yeah, this is a crazy out-of-the-box idea, but for that, you'll need to look at this other sheet of paper. In doing some research last month, I was revising a setting of the Star-Spangled Banner that I'd written back in the 1990s. I was teaching at a high school there and only had a few boys in my choir, and so I did an arrangement of the national anthem for male quartet TTBB, and we sang it, and yeah, we got some more boys interested in singing, and so while I was revising, well, and since then I've made some other versions, SATB, SAB, SSAA, and some other things. I'm working on some instrumental versions right now, and then in doing research and trying to get those online, I found out that the composer of the tune, John Stafford Smith, was a friend of Johann Christian Bach. So then I thought, wow, now wouldn't it be cool if for this concert, then since we're already playing a piece by Johann Christian Bach, and since it's the 250th anniversary of our nation coming up in about a month, we should sing the national anthem. So we decided to include that on the program, but we're not just singing one verse. See, the thing about it is, most, like if you go to a baseball game or football game, you sing one verse. The problem is, if you end that verse, you leave poor Francis Scott Key on the boat, not knowing what really ever happened. Now, he actually wrote a 4-stanza poem, and here you can see then stanza 2 and stanza 4. So, understand here what's going on. So he was on the Admiral's ship. There were 20 ships in the Boston Harbor, and they wanted to capture Fort McHenry. The prior month, 5,000 British troops had burned down Washington, D.C. James Madison and his cabinet had fled, leaving Dolly in the White House, and she was not too happy about that. If you look at her diary, she called them a bunch of cowards. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. And so if the British had captured Fort McHenry, our nation would have been done for, and we would have only had 4 presidents. And now, of course, some of us think that might have been good if we just had 4 presidents, you know, because, well, anyway, that's another story. But, so there were 20 ships, and then Francis Scott Key saw they were making arrangements for a big attack. So he had made, they did agreed to release, he had gone there to get this prisoner released, and they agreed to release this doctor that they had imprisoned, but then they kept him on the ship because otherwise he would have told the fort what was going on. Well, the fort kind of knew what was going to happen. Well, so on September 13th, at 5 a.m., the British started. They had 5 battleships in there and 1 ship to fire rockets. And they started to blast the fort. For 25 hours, they blasted the fort. Twice they tried to make a landing, but the major of the fort, he held fire. He knew that he really couldn't, the battleships couldn't do much to them. They were shooting from 2 miles out anyway, but if there was a landing, then that was a problem. So once they saw the boats, then they blasted the boats, and then those boats retreated. But this was going on all through the day and all through the night, and the rockets were these new kind of rockets called the Congreve rockets. They looked really spectacular, but they had no fins, and so when they went up, they were like a firecracker. And so they didn't really do much, but he still didn't know what was going on. And that's what the first verse tells us. And basically he says, well, I knew that they must not have captured the fort yet because the British still keep firing. So then now the second verse starts at about now 6 o'clock then the next morning, September 14th, and the sun is coming up. And all of a sudden, the British stop firing. If you look at the text, it says, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes. All of a sudden, the battleship just is like, okay, we give up. All right, so then it starts to clear, and in the next line, he sees the flag. And so that's what the whole second verse is about. Then the third verse is basically a declaration of victory. We are not singing that tonight, but then the fourth verse is thanking God then for the establishment of the nation and for sustaining the nation. So that's kind of a special thing we added to the program tonight. Then we're going to end with this great movement from Cantata 79, Now Thank We All Our God. I made an arrangement of it which features the strings. For a couple years ago, we did a conference at a church celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Lutheran Chorale, and so I added a verse 2 and a verse 3 to that, and so then that's how our program ends this evening. So I would like to spend a little bit of time now talking a little bit more deeply about this motet, Unser Leben ist ein Schatten. And so choir, if you could come on up and take the places, and we'll continue our warm-up with the choir and have them demonstrate a little bit what's going on in this piece. Now, to talk a little bit and set this up, this is Johann Sebastian's great-great-uncle. So now, if you look in your program, this is going to be the piece right after intermission. All right, and so the German is Unser Leben ist ein Schatten. The English, our life is a shadow. Now, if you look at the bottom, you'll see that there are actually 6 sections to this motet. On the bottom of the first page, you'll see 1, Unser Leben ist ein Schatten, and then you'll see 2, Ich weiß wohl. Now, the English is on the right. Unser Leben ist ein Schatten means our days on earth are a shadow. Then we have a funeral hymn. Then if we turn the page, then we have words of Jesus. Ich bin die Auferstehung und das Leben. I am the resurrection and the life. Now this comes from the story of the raising of Lazarus. So Lazarus was sick. So Mary and Martha, his sisters, sent a messenger to Jesus to tell him to come. And Jesus said, well, I'm not going to come right now. And so then they were really disappointed, and Lazarus died. So when Jesus finally came, then Martha went up to him and said, if you had been here, you would have been able to heal him and he wouldn't have died. And Jesus said, well, he died for a reason, and that was because he was going to raise him from the dead. And so then they had to talk back a little bit forth, and then finally Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. Everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Then, section 4, and these sections are not like cantata sections and cantata movements when there's, a minute or so in between each one. These are very short time in between each one, so they'll go right through quite quickly. Because since you are risen from the dead I will not remain in the grave. And then you can see the text there. So that's stanza 4 of another funeral hymn. And then we have section 5, 2 stanzas from a hymn. We performed Bach's cantata on this hymn a couple years ago. I love this hymn just because it's so fun to say, ach, wie flüchtig, ach, wie nichtig. In fact, we practiced that with the choir. Let's say that. Ready? Ach, wie flüchtig, ach, wie nichtig. Good. And then do it's like, ah, right? My mother, she had this saying, ah, when us kids were mucking around too much, ah, donnerwetter, thunder weather, right? So, ah, right? And then really emphasizing the first syllable and de-emphasizing the second one. So let's do it even more dramatically. Ready? Ah, wie flüchtig, ah, wie nichtig. So what does that mean? Well, how fleeting, how vain or futile is human life. And then we get into the last section, section 6. Now, in this case, this is a really, really dramatic part in the whole piece, because he uses a text again from another funeral hymn, but in this case, he doesn't use the melody of the funeral hymn, but instead it's free composition. It's just this marvelous mass of sound. And so we're going to demonstrate a little bit of that for you. Now this is in 6 parts, 6-part harmony down here, and then there's a second choir to this one, and that's going to be up there. Is choir 2 here yet? There they are. Oh. Our soloists are going to be 3 of our soloists. So Jerry Sundberg, they're in Trevor Mitchell and Lily Thompson. And so they are going to be, now the reason we have them up there, because Johann Bach in his score writes in Latin, latens, which means hidden. And so, well, we decided that we like them a lot, so we're not going to hide them completely, but they're going to be up there. Now, we were talking a little bit with the choir practicing this last night, and so we had each of the solos introduce themselves a little bit, and Jerry said the funniest thing. He said, well, I sang at the first Bach Festival, 2003, and that was before some of you were even born. And sure enough, yeah, so anyway, that was a lot of fun. So now, to get used to the 6 parts, we sang a canon by Thomas Tallis. And so choir, let's just do that a little bit right now. All right, some of you might know this. It's All Praise to Thee, My God, This Night. I'm going to just run over to the piano here and get a pitch. And then for warm-up, sometimes we sing in solfege. That's do, re, mi, fa, sol. Okay, on solfege. Do it in 4 parts, but now we are running out of time, so now we're just going to do it in 6 parts. So now that's the first time we've ever done anything in the Bach Festival 6 parts, and so that's why I decided to do that. Now we're going to sing just a little bit of each of the sections. So the first section is very dramatic. This actually comes from the book of Job. And these are words of Bildad the Shuhite. Now my dad had a joke when we were growing up. You know who the shortest man in the Bible is? Bildad the Shuhite. Get it? Shuhite. Anyway, so these are the words of Bildad the Shuhite. He's trying to give advice to Job. Then he says, life is but a shadow. Now the German is kind of like navel or fog. In other words, or like the mist of the morning. Now in the Ecclesiastes it's translated, our life is meaningless, but that's actually, the Hebrew is more like mist. You know, it's here and then it just goes away. So now listen to this dramatic beginning. For dramatic effect. Isn't that just great? Now, you hear the sopranos going, yada-doo. They're singing, yeah, give them a... Now, and when you hear them going up on these 16th notes, that's on the word Schatten, shadow, and it's disappearing, yada-doo-doo, and it's gone. All right, so that's what's going on there. Now, we sing that several times, and then they join us with a funeral hymn, and it kind of goes back and forth. So our pitches are real quick here. So we have the hidden choir now singing. Ready? 1, 2, 3. There's a couple of amazing things here. The last words there are, my Jesus, I will not leave you. In other words, I'm going to hold on to you no matter what happens, right? So, and then also, this is in C minor, but you hear it twice. The choir has ended in a C major chord. Now, in theory, we call that a Picardy third. And so, anyway, that actually is repeated because there's a second verse. Then we have these great words from Jesus. I am the resurrection and the life. Now, this is also for 3 parts, but this is for choir 1. Here we go. And so I told them when we were first practicing it, so you have to sing this with authority. You have to pretend you're Jesus. section. Here we go. Start a little softer and let it build to soft. There we go. So then we have that wonderful section there. And then we're running out of time, so let's go to section 5. Here is this wonderful hymn. Ach, wie flüchtig, ach, wie nichtig. All right, here we go. Got your pictures? Same C minor. 2, 3. Ach, wie flüchtig, ach, wie nichtig ist der Menschenleben. Wie ein Liebebach entsteht und Gott wiederum vergeht, so ist unser And that's all. Oops. That's all the time we have for this little extra. So take the time between now and the concert to look through the notes and look through the text and familiarize yourself with it so that when we perform this wonderful song, you can appreciate even more. So let's thank our choir and thank our soloists. Oh, they disappeared. They ascended into heaven. All right, thank you, choir. All right, so now we'll let the instrumentalists come in and get ready for the concert. So we should have marked these seats. We actually need the first row. Yeah, so we'll just move one back. That would be great. We